Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
I'm Alicia Cielle Heiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition. Hey everyone! So we just recorded an episode talking about the rulers of houses in astrology, which is linked down below if you haven't watched it. And now we're going to kind of build off of that and just talk a little bit about what it means if you have an empty house in your chart and how you can work with empty houses in your chart. But if you're not familiar with house rulership, we highly recommend you go watch our other two episodes we've already done about house rulership before you dig into this episode, just so you can get some of the technique and understand more what we're talking about. But if we're looking at empty houses in our chart, I feel like that can be such a common thing that can come up online and people can ask, like, oh, I don't have any planets in my ninth house. Like, what's going on with my ninth house? And one of the first things to do is to look at the planet who's ruling your empty house or houses and see what that planet is doing. Because, for example, I don't have any planets in my ninth house, but my ninth house is a Gemini ninth house, and my Mercury is conjunct the ascendant. So actually, ninth house topics are very important to me and have been very important and activating to me in my entire life because the ruler of my ninth house is so deeply enmeshed with my sense of self and incarnation in this world. So looking at the planet that rules your empty house or houses is where you're going to get the information about those houses. And then also looking at other points and things besides planets to see if maybe your house isn't as empty as you thought. So sticking with my Gemini example, I actually have the lot of fortune in my ninth house. And for the longest time, I didn't work with the lot of fortune. So I always thought of my ninth house as empty. But then once I started working more with Hellenistic techniques and got familiar with the lot of fortune, and especially after attending a retreat with Lori and Demetra George last June, where we talked about the lot of fortune quite a bit, and I work with Larry Arrington, who talks about the lot of fortune all the time. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's another reason why my ninth house would be so activated. So, we can list, there's a lot of fortune, there's a lot of spirit, there's a ton of other lots you could look at. There's asteroids. Lori and I have done a lot of episodes about asteroids, so you can look up if any asteroids are in your charts, and specifically looking at our Asteroids 101 episode, if you're not familiar with asteroids. You can look for your nodes. Any other points you can think of, Lori?
Yeah, well, I was gonna add on with the asteroid conversation, like there are 30,000 asteroids, so you are going to find some in your
Yeah.
empty houses. But it can be more helpful if you stick to just the more important ones, like the four goddesses, maybe Lilith, maybe Chiron, just some of the bigger ones. But yes, the lot of spirit, the lot of Eros, and of course the lot of fortune can be very important. Those three, I would argue, are more important than some of the other ones, but there's also hundreds of lots that you can calculate and look up in your chart. And then the North and South Node, which aren't used too much in Hellenistic astrology unless we're talking about the moon or eclipses. But all of these different points are going to also give you some sort of nuance. So if you include those points, I actually don't have any empty houses. You can also look at your MCIC line because my Virgo third house was completely empty until I learned about the Lot of Fortune as well. But my IC is actually there. And so, you might have an empty house, but then you might have your IC in it. Um,
And with that
yeah.
one, the angles in our chart, right? Because we have the ascendant and descendant, which your ascendant's always in your first house. It's what marks what your first house is. And the descendant is always in your seventh house. But when you use whole sign houses, which we dig more into why we work with whole sign houses in
Hmm.
our episode about what houses mean in astrology, there's a million different house systems. We're not here to argue
Yeah.
about it, but we do use
Yeah.
we do use Hellenistic techniques, and we've found a lot of resonance when we work with whole sign houses. And when you use that house system in particular, you might end up with a floating MC or IC, where instead of
Yeah.
the MC always being in the 10th house like it is in quadrant houses,
Or
it
being the
might be in
ruler of
the
the 10th, or the starting of the 10th.
yeah. With the whole sign house system, you might actually have your MC in either the ninth or the 11th, or if you're born at very far in northern or southern latitudes, maybe even the 12th or the 8th. Like, I think one of the British royal family people has their MC in the 12th, which is interesting because they're kind of
That's super
confined
interesting.
to their public life in a very 12th house way. So
Yeah.
you might find your MC in a different house than the 10th, which then your IC being exactly opposite would be in a different house. And me, similarly, I have an empty Aquarius fifth house, but I do have my IC in the fifth house. And the angles are some of the most important houses or points in your chart because they're like these pivot points
Hmm.
of extra energy, kind of like if you are playing Mario Kart and you get that like speed boost going around a turn.
Hmm.
That's kind of what the angles do in your chart, where they're, like your ascendant, that's you. That's a very energetic, important part of your life, right? Your partnership is very important. Your public life, your MC is very important, and your home and foundation is very important. And so if you have an empty house that actually has an angle in it, that house then becomes very, very significant because there is
Yes.
a lot of energy that is focused in there, like literally geometrically when you're thinking about the movement of the planets through the sky. And the
Yeah.
IC literally representing the nadir, which is the point when planets would stop their descent and start ascending back up to the horizon. And the MC being the top of particularly the sun's travel through the sky. The MC is the point when the sun gets to its highest point in its travel and then begins to descend towards sunset. So the angles in particular, because yeah, as Lori said, like there's 30,000 asteroids, there's a ton of lots. So just because you find, you listen to our Okiro episode and you have Okiro in the 12th and you're like, okay, my 12th is really significant. If it feels significant for you, absolutely go with it. But if
Yeah.
Okiro isn't really aspecting anything else, you don't have much going on in your 12th house, the ruler of your 12th isn't very loud in your chart,
Mm.
then the 12th house might still be a more quiet house for you.
Yeah.
But even empty houses still matter because every topic in our life has an influence on us, but some topics will be louder than others.
Yeah. Yeah. And even with those asteroids, like you said, like you can maybe see it show up in that house. I've definitely had asteroids I've looked up before where they weren't, they weren't prominent, but maybe something about the story resonated with my family, and then I found it in my fourth house. Or I resonated with a story because, oh, a friend used to say that or do that, and then I found it in my 11th house.
Hmm.
Um, I've definitely had those moments where I've looked up asteroids and thought they were going to be more prominent, but the house made sense that it was in, but it didn't, otherwise make any aspects, or it wasn't conjunct a planet or anything. And so
Hmm.
things like that, I would almost discount them as not super important just because there's too many things.
Hmm.
But things like the Lot of Fortune are definitely important. If you use the nodes, a lot of modern astrology uses the nodes. more than we do.
Yeah.
But those could be seen as very important as well.
Yeah. And then another way to work with empty houses is by timing techniques. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you have an empty house and then you're having a big transit come through it, like Jupiter is going to ingress into Cancer in June of 2025, and if you have an empty
Mhm.
Cancer house, then the next year, from June of 2025 to June of 2026, while Jupiter is in Cancer, those life topics might be extra activated for you for that limited period of time because transits are a limited period of time, which when they're a good transit can be disappointing, but when they're a bad transit, that can actually be a very comforting thing about astrology is knowing when the transit will end,
Yeah.
as opposed to our birth chart is our natal promise, and we have our whole lives to live out our natal promise, but the transit is the finite period of time. So when you do have an empty house, paying attention to when transits are moving through it can really help illuminate that house, help you learn more about what that house is doing in your birth chart and how it's influencing you, and also help you just activate things going on in that house through the transit. And then you
Yeah.
can also do that with progressions as well,
Hmm.
especially the progressed moon, which we have some episodes about moon phases as well as working with your progressed moon. So if
Yeah.
that's a new technique, I definitely recommend going and looking up those episodes because the progressed moon is so illuminating to work with. But the progressed moon will spend about 2.5, 3 years in each house in our chart in its 28, 29 year cycle around our chart. And so for those few years, your progressed moon will spotlight and activate those life topics for you, which, like, for example, for me, my seventh house is empty besides my descendant being there. And my moon progressed into Aries, which is my seventh house, in April of 2024. And within like 2 weeks, I had gotten into my relationship with my partner. And now it's like a very serious, long term, committed partnership. But that activation happened almost exactly with my moon progressing into my seventh house. And so if you're like, oh, when will a new partner come into my life? That could be one thing. If your moon's about to progress into your seventh house, that can bring extra illumination. But also with any empty house, it can just give you that few year period of time to get to know your house better while the moon's moving through it. Hey everyone, it's Alicia, and I offer 60 and 90-minute virtual astrology consultations where we explore your birth chart using Hellenistic techniques, myth, and herbal wisdom to help you understand the cycles weaving through your life so you can honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition. I'm offering 20% off my readings for listeners of the podcast when you use the code CONVO20 at checkout. The link to my booking page is in the show notes below.
Yeah, we actually just did progressed moons or progressed charts in general in our course last week. Um our class, and we talked so much about the progressed moon moving through the houses and moving through the signs, and especially when it's in a sign that you don't typically have a lot going on in that house. Like my progressed chart, my moon in January just moved into Gemini and left Taurus.
Hmm.
So I've been thinking a lot about how that is going to show up. It hasn't showed up too much yet, I don't think, but yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that a lot because both my 11th and 12th house, which are my Taurus and Gemini houses, are empty, um, except for plot points and stuff. And so, um, yeah, that can definitely give you another technique to kind of see when those themes show up in your life.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's most of what I had to say about empty houses. Did you have anything else you wanted to like mull
Yeah.
over?
I guess just reiterating the point one last time that like an empty house still has a ruler. And we
Hmm.
talked about that a lot in our last episode, but I just think that's so important to give more nuance to those empty houses and those empty spaces, um, to just see how they are going to show up for you or where they're going to manifest or um like I have an empty 12th house except for my South Node. but it's ruled by Gemini, and my Mercury is 3 degrees from my sun, so it's combust. And so just even thinking about how do 12th house themes show up, right? I don't need alone time. I've never been a person who felt introverted or needed alone time, but even if it's nice sometimes, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So sometimes I think about my 12th house in that way. Like it's just not something I need. Um, I am also really bad at sleeping. Um, I have to wear myself out to be able to sleep. So like even themes like that aren't like terribly important in your life, you can still kind of think on them and like give them a space to share. Or like sometimes for me at least, with having an empty 12th house with my south node there being ruled by my Mercury in Aquarius, it's combust by the sun, but also between my sun and Saturn, um, you know, that is not a loud house in my chart. It's not really a house that's going to be a natural place for me to go. And so when it can be things like retreat, release, rest, like being alone, having alone time, um, those things don't come naturally. So like, giving them a space to exist can be really important. So, I have to intentionally have slow mornings sometimes where I just drink my coffee and let myself be alone for a little while. Or, you know, I have created a really good journal practice for myself. Journaling has been a big, big thing that I do. And I like almost play a game with it and keep really good track of my card of the day every day and like how certain themes and things show up in my life, because if I don't, I won't do it at all. So like, finding different ways to like what I'm trying to say is just like let those empty houses have an outlet, like let them show up in your life.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Totally.
you
And
might just have to be
also,
more mindful of them.
this just like starts to go beyond the nature of this episode, but I feel like you just did
Totally.
such a good job describing a Gemini 12th house as well. Because,
I
like,
know, yeah.
Gemini's the twins. Like if you're a
Yeah,
Cancer rising, like, there's this inherent contradiction of like not being alone. Like, whatever, wherever
right.
Gemini is in your house, like, you always want to like take your partners. So if it's your 12th
Hmm.
house, it's like you don't need to be alone. And then, as an herbalist, I just love working with the elements of the houses to
Yeah,
like dig into them better. And yeah, if you have an air sign 12th house, journaling is a great way to be alone.
yeah,
Whereas, like, I have a Virgo 12th house, and so I like to go out to nature and to the woods and to be outdoors. And my
yeah,
12th house is very different because my Mercury is conjunct my ascendant. So 12th house topics are actually very tied into my identity and sense of self. And I grew up an only child and I do need a lot of time alone, but I tend to seek that out in more earthy environments as well. So that can be another way to connect with your
yeah.
empty houses, is to think of the element that is on that house and to honor the element. And that's another shout out to another previous episode we've done. I think it's like the first episode we ever did was working
Hmm.
with elements and temperament. And so if you're
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to get to know an empty house, really digging into the element of that house, really reflecting on, as Lori said, as we'll keep saying when we talk about houses, the
Yeah,
ruler of the house is who really matters. So really like digging into the nuance of what the ruler of your empty house is doing in your birth chart, what they're doing by transit as well, can really help you get to know those houses more, because empty houses do
for
really
sure.
matter. And sometimes they can matter more than you realize.
Right. Yeah, and like yeah, having a Mercury ruled 12th house, like Mercury, if you are Cancer rising and you do relate to that Gemini 12th house energy, the third house is your other Mercury ruled house. So,
Mm-hmm.
there is an aspect there of like having journaling, like being able to write, being able to communicate. Like I take solo walks all the time, but I end up leaving voice messages to my friends. And And I end up saying in them sometimes, like, hey, you don't even have to listen to this. I'm processing. So, it's pretty funny to even see how, like, because I don't have any planets in Gemini or Virgo, it is funny to see how they can still show up in your life, even if it's not as glaringly obvious as my eighth house stellium is, or how important my chart rulers in my 10th, or Mars on the ascendant. Like there's so many other louder pieces of my chart and of everyone's chart. You're going to have the houses that are louder. You're going to have pieces of your chart that are going to be more important or more notable, but these empty houses, like, they do still have a voice.
Yeah. And also giving yourself permission. Like, if you have an empty 10th house and you just really don't care about your work or like
Yeah.
your public life that much, and you feel like you should care more about your work because you live in capitalism and there's this grind culture, but you have an empty 10th house, giving yourself permission. And then, like, maybe you have a fifth house stellium and you actually just want to be at home making art all the time and you don't really care about your career. Like,
Yeah.
also just give yourself permission. Like, your birth chart is you, and that's what can be so beautiful about astrology as well, is like getting to know who we are really well and confirming our intuition, because we already know who we are. It's just nice to have it reflected back in another form through our birth chart. And so when you
Yeah.
do have an empty house, if that's just something that doesn't feel super important to you in your life, like, that is totally okay as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, please comment. Let us know if you have any empty houses, how you relate to them, if you had any ahas while listening to this. We love hearing from you guys. And we're going to record some more house topic episodes as well to just keep talking about how juicy it is working with houses. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.